The transport ship Endeavour drifted silently through the void toward the massive Alliance station. Inside the cramped diplomatic quarters, Ambassador David Clark checked his environmental suit for the third time in 10 minutes. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the oxygen flow regulator. "David, you need to calm down," Dr. Emma Watson said from across the compartment. She sat beside a large biocontainment unit, her fingers dancing over its control panel. Green lights blinked steadily, indicating their precious cargo remained stable. "If you keep fidgeting like that, they'll know something's wrong before we even dock." David forced his hands to still. 30 years, Emma. 30 years the Deathworld Alliance has treated us like children. Every trade negotiation, every diplomatic meeting, they look at us like we're soft creatures who got lucky with an easy planet. He stared out the viewport at the approaching station. "Maybe we are soft. Maybe this whole plan is insane." Emma's laugh held no humor. "Soft? David, we're about to hand them a weapon that makes their acid storms and gravity wells look like gentle spring rain. If that's soft, I'd hate to see what they consider hard." The station grew larger in the viewport, a massive construct of dark metal and glowing energy conduits. It spun slowly on its axis, generating artificial gravity for the dozens of species that called it home. Each section was built to accommodate beings from worlds so hostile that most civilized species considered them uninhabitable. "Incoming transmission from Alliance Control," announced the ship's AI. "They are requesting identification and cargo manifest." David activated the communication system. "This is Ambassador Clark aboard the diplomatic vessel Endeavour. We're carrying a goodwill gift from Earth to the Deathworld Alliance Council. Requesting permission to dock." A harsh voice crackled through the speakers, speaking in the guttural tones of a Sulphurworld native. "Earthship, you are cleared for docking Bay 7. Be advised that all organic materials must pass through full biological screening. We don't want your soft-world diseases contaminating our station." Emma rolled her eyes. Soft-world diseases. If only they knew. The docking process took an hour. Alliance security protocols were extensive, designed by beings who had survived environments where a single mistake meant death. Guards in environmental suits scanned every inch of the Endeavour, their weapons ready despite this being a diplomatic mission. Commander Rex Thorne was waiting in the docking bay when they disembarked. His species had evolved on a world where the rain was sulfuric acid and the air was poisonous to most life forms. His carapace bore the scars of 1,000 survival battles, and his compound eyes missed nothing as they examined the human delegation. "Ambassador Clark," Rex's voice rumbled through his translator device. "I confess surprise at this gesture. Earth has shown little interest in Alliance affairs beyond basic trade agreements." David forced a smile. "Times change, Commander. Humanity wishes to demonstrate our commitment to interspecies cooperation. We've brought something very special from our world, something that embodies the true nature of Earth's unique ecosystem." Rex's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Earth's unique ecosystem. Yes, we've all heard the reports. A garden world with breathable atmosphere and liquid water oceans. Hardly the crucible that forges true survivors. Emma stepped forward, her hands resting protectively on the biocontainment unit. "May we present our gift to the full council? I think you'll find it enlightening." The procession through the station was like walking through a museum of hostile evolution. Beings with crystalline skin that had evolved to resist radiation walked alongside creatures whose multiple hearts had developed to pump blood through bodies adapted for crushing gravity. The walls themselves told stories of survival, constructed from materials that could withstand the kind of environmental extremes that would instantly kill most known life forms. The council chamber was a vast circular room with environmental controls that allowed dozens of species to coexist. The air was thick and humid, heated to accommodate cold world species while maintaining pressure levels that wouldn't crush the more delicate representatives. Councillor Grace Blackwood approached them as they entered. Her people had evolved on a frozen world where the temperature never rose above -40 degrees. Ice crystals formed naturally in her breath, creating small clouds as she spoke. "Welcome to the Alliance, humans. We are curious about this gift you've brought us." David placed the biocontainment unit on the central table. Through its transparent walls, a small green plant was visible, its delicate leaves swaying gently in the controlled atmosphere. It looked impossibly fragile compared to the hardened beings surrounding it. "This is a specimen of Earth flora," Emma explained, her voice steady despite the curious stares of creatures that could survive being boiled alive or frozen solid. "It's called Mimosa pudica, though we sometimes refer to it by other names. It represents something fundamental about our world's approach to survival." Captain Jack Morrison, a veteran whose cybernetic implants had replaced organs destroyed by his homeworld's electromagnetic storms, leaned closer to examine the plant. It's very small. And it appears to be extremely vulnerable. What makes it special? Emma smiled and reached through the containment field to gently touch one of the leaves. Instantly, the entire branch folded inward, the leaves closing tightly against the stem as if recoiling from contact. The council chamber erupted in sounds that might have been laughter across a dozen different species. Clicking mandibles, grinding stones, and harmonic vibrations filled the air. A plant that hides from danger, Rex observed, his compound eyes reflecting light as they focused on the specimen. How perfectly representative of Earth's survival philosophy. When faced with threat, retreat and hope the danger passes. David's smile never wavered, though Emma noticed his knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the table. We thought you might find it interesting. There are extensive care instructions, of course. Earth flora can be quite particular about environmental conditions. The plant slowly reopened its leaves, returning to its previous state of apparent vulnerability. We accept your gift, Grace announced formally. It will serve as a reminder of Earth's unique perspective on survival and adaptation. As the ceremony concluded and the human delegation prepared to depart, Emma whispered to David, "Are you sure about this? Once we leave, there's no taking it back." David watched as Alliance technicians prepared to move the biocontainment unit to its permanent location in the station's central hub. The plant swayed innocently in its artificial atmosphere, giving no hint of what was to come. "They wanted to test our resolve," he replied quietly. "Let's see how they handle the results." Lieutenant Tom Harris sat in the Alliance Station's observation lounge, watching the endless void of space through the reinforced viewport. 3 days had passed since the diplomatic ceremony, and he was the only human remaining on the station. His official role was cultural liaison, but in reality, he was there to monitor what everyone still believed was just an innocent plant. The biocontainment unit now sat in the central diplomatic chamber, where Alliance representatives could observe it during their daily meetings. Tom had spent most of his time there, supposedly to answer questions about Earth flora, but actually to watch for the first signs of what was coming. "Your people seem very concerned about a simple plant," Captain Jack Morrison observed, settling his massive frame into a chair beside Tom. The cybernetic implants along his spine hummed softly as they compensated for the station's gravity. "I've counted 17 visits from you in 3 days." Tom forced his hands to remain steady as he sipped his coffee. "Earth plants can be sensitive to environmental changes. We want to make sure it adapts well to station life." The lie came easily now, after days of practice. Jack's artificial eye focused on Tom with mechanical precision. "The care instructions you provided were quite detailed. Temperature controls, atmospheric composition, even specific wavelengths of light. It seems like a lot of effort for something so small." "Small things can be important," Tom replied, hoping his voice sounded casual. "On Earth, we've learned that the smallest organisms can have the biggest impact on an ecosystem." Through the lounge speakers, the gentle hum of the station's environmental systems provided a constant background noise. Life support, artificial gravity, atmospheric processes, all working together to keep dozens of different species alive in the same space. Tom had been listening to these sounds for days now, waiting for something new to join them. In the diplomatic chamber, the plant had settled into its new home remarkably well. If anything, it looked healthier than when it had arrived. Its leaves were fuller, greener, and it had grown noticeably taller. Several Alliance members had made jokes about Earth's aggressive gardening techniques, not realizing that the plant's growth was anything but normal. Counselor Rachel Green was the first to notice the change. Her species had evolved enhanced hearing to survive on a world where predators hunted by sound, and her ears could detect frequencies that most other beings couldn't perceive. She was reviewing trade agreements in her quarters when she first heard it, a soft humming, like a distant melody played on instruments she couldn't identify. "Computer, run a diagnostic on environmental systems," she commanded, thinking it might be some malfunction in the air recyclers or power grid. "All systems operating within normal parameters," the station's AI responded. "No anomalies detected." But the humming continued, soft and musical, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Rachel tried to ignore it, but her evolved hearing made that impossible. The sound seemed to follow her as she moved through the station, growing stronger in some areas and fainter in others. By the 4th day, other Alliance members began to notice it too. Commander Rex mentioned it during the morning briefing, his mandibles clicking with irritation. "There's some kind of audio interference in the central sections. Maintenance crews need to find the source." The maintenance teams found nothing wrong. Every system checked out perfectly, every component functioning exactly as designed. But the humming grew stronger, more complex, developing harmonies and rhythms that seemed almost alive. Tom spent more time in the diplomatic chamber now, ostensibly to monitor the plant's health, but really to watch the growing unease among the Alliance representatives. The plant continued to thrive, its root system somehow extending beyond the biocontainment unit despite all safety protocols showing green across the board. How is that possible? Dr. Sarah Adams asked when she discovered delicate root tendrils following the ventilation ducts. Her medical training made her naturally curious about biological processes, and this violated everything she understood about contained specimens. Tom checked his scanner readings for the 20th time that day. The containment field is designed to allow limited root expansion for the plant's health. It's perfectly normal behavior for this species when establishing itself in a new environment. Sarah's expression suggested she didn't entirely believe him, but she had no evidence to contradict his explanation. The roots were thin as hair and seemed harmless enough, following the station's infrastructure like ivy following a wall. What she didn't know was that those roots were integrating with more than just the ventilation system. They were finding their way into the station's data networks, power conduits, and communication arrays, creating connections that the station's sensors weren't designed to detect. The humming evolved into whispers by the 5th day. Alliance members reported hearing voices in their native languages, speaking words they couldn't quite understand. The sound seemed to follow them through the corridors, growing stronger near the central hub where the plant had made its home. It's probably just audio feedback from the communication systems, Rex suggested during another fruitless maintenance review. With all the different species and translation protocols, some kind of harmonic interference was bound to happen eventually. But privately, he was beginning to worry. His species had survived on one of the galaxy's most hostile worlds, and that survival had depended on recognizing threats before they became deadly. Something about the whispers triggered deep evolutionary instincts that told him danger was approaching. Tom Harris sat in his quarters that night, recording his daily report to Earth Command. His hands shook as he spoke into the secure communicator. Day 5. The specimen has established itself successfully. Root integration is proceeding faster than expected. Audio manifestations have begun. I estimate we have perhaps 48 hours before full activation. He paused, staring out at the stars. Somewhere out there, Earth waited for news of humanity's first real demonstration of power to the Deathworld Alliance. The plant in the diplomatic chamber looked innocent enough, but Tom knew better. He had seen the classified files, understood what they had really sent to this station. The whispers were just the beginning. Soon, the Alliance would understand what it truly meant to be survivors in a universe where the most dangerous predators weren't always the ones with claws and fangs. Sometimes, they were the ones that looked completely harmless. The humming continued through the night, growing stronger with each passing hour. And in the diplomatic chamber, the plant swayed gently in its artificial atmosphere, its leaves rustling with sounds that weren't quite wind, its roots spreading deeper into the station's vital systems. The screaming would begin soon. Captain Henry Miller jerked awake in his quarters as the sound tore through the station like a living thing. His military training kicked in instantly, flooding his system with combat chemicals as his species-enhanced reflexes responded to what every instinct told him was mortal danger. The sound wasn't mechanical. It wasn't the grinding of failing equipment or the hiss of escaping atmosphere. It was screaming, raw, primal, desperate screaming that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Henry rolled out of his bunk and grabbed his weapon, his scarred hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had survived 3 separate wars on his home planet. The screaming grew louder as he stepped into the corridor, a cacophony of voices crying out in languages he didn't recognize. All security teams to emergency stations, he barked into his communicator, but his own voice was nearly lost in the noise. The screaming wasn't just loud, it was invasive, seeping into his thoughts and triggering memories he had spent years trying to forget. Emergency lights bathed the corridors in red as Henry made his way toward the central hub. Other Alliance members stumbled through the passages, some covering their ears, others moving with the glazed expressions of people experiencing walking nightmares. A crystalline from the radiation world stood frozen against a bulkhead, her normally clear skin flickering with chaotic patterns of light. What's happening? Counselor Rachel Green appeared beside him, her enhanced hearing obviously causing her tremendous pain. Blood trickled from her elongated ears, and her face was twisted in agony. I don't know, Henry admitted, having to shout to be heard. But it's coming from the diplomatic chamber. They fought their way through corridors that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. The screaming had layers now, children crying, warriors dying, the last gasps of plague victims and the desperate prayers of the lost. But underneath it all was something else, something that made Henry's survival instincts scream warnings he couldn't understand. The diplomatic chamber had been transformed into something from a nightmare. The small plant that had sat innocently on the conference table for 5 days now dominated half the room, its massive form writhing with unnatural life. Thick roots burst through the floor panels, pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to follow the rhythm of nearby heartbeats. The biocontainment unit lay in fragments, scattered among vegetation that moved with purpose rather than the random swaying of normal plants. And in the corner, Lieutenant Tom Harris sat rocking back and forth, tears streaming down his face. Tom. Henry grabbed the human by the shoulders, shaking him. What is this thing? What have you done to us? Tom looked up with eyes that had seen too much. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the chaos. We didn't know it would grow so fast away from Earth. We didn't know what it would find here. Dr. Sarah Adams stumbled into the chamber, her medical scanner in her hands. As she approached the plant, the screaming intensified, and suddenly she was experiencing memories that belonged to someone else. A young Sulphur World warrior watching his entire unit dissolve in an acid storm because he had chosen the wrong shelter. The weight of command, the guilt of survival, the faces of friends who died because of his mistake. Sarah staggered backward, gasping. It's not just making noise, she managed to say. It's in our heads. It's taking our memories and showing them back to us. The plant pulsed, and the chamber filled with new visions. A crystalline child hiding in radiation caves while her family was hunted by surface predators. The moment of choice, save herself or try to help others. The endless guilt of choosing survival. How? Commander Rex burst into the room, his weapon drawn but useless against something that attacked the mind rather than the body. In the swaying fronds of the plant, he could see faces, Alliance faces, twisted in expressions of terror and regret. Tom struggled to his feet, leaning against the wall for support. It's a psychic organism, he said, his voice growing stronger as he forced himself to explain. It feeds on emotional trauma, stores it, processes it. On Earth, it grew near battlefields, near places where humans suffered and died. The plant responded to his words with a new wave of screaming, and suddenly the chamber was filled with human voices, ancient voices speaking in dead languages, crying out from conflicts that had ended centuries ago. It learned from us first, Tom continued, tears still flowing. Thousands of years of human warfare, human suffering. Every battle, every genocide, every moment of psychological pain that soaked into the soil where it grew. It absorbed all of it. Rachel collapsed to her knees, her hands pressed against her ears. Make it stop, she begged. Please, make it stop. It can't stop, Tom said. That's what it does. It takes the trauma of every living thing near it and amplifies it, broadcasts it, forces everyone to experience what survival really costs. The plant pulsed again, and Commander Rex found himself reliving the moment he had been forced to abandon his own brother during a chemical storm, leaving him to die so that others might escape. The guilt that had driven him to become the Alliance's most decorated warrior, the pain he had buried beneath layers of duty and honor. You knew, he accused, raising his weapon toward Tom. You humans knew what this would do to us. Tom nodded, not flinching from the threat. We knew it would show you what Earth really is. Not a garden world where life is easy, but a place where the most dangerous predator is other humans. Where survival means living with psychological scars that never heal. The screaming reached a new intensity, and across the station, Alliance members began collapsing as their own suppressed memories of loss and trauma were dragged to the surface and magnified beyond endurance. Your worlds made you strong against physical threats, Tom continued, his voice somehow carrying over the noise. Acid rain, radiation, crushing gravity, predators with claws and fangs. But you never learned to defend against attacks on the mind, against weapons that turn your own memories into torture devices. Henry lowered his weapon, understanding dawning in his eyes. This is what humans call warfare. This is what we survived, Tom corrected. Every day, for thousands of years. And we learned to weaponize our own pain, to turn suffering itself into a tool. The plant continued to grow, its roots spreading deeper into the station systems, its influence expanding with each passing moment. The screaming had become a permanent feature of life aboard the station, a constant reminder that survival meant more than just staying alive. It meant learning to live with the cost of living. The emergency bulkheads had sealed automatically when the screaming began, dividing the station into isolated sections. In the secondary conference room, Far from the central hub where the plant continued its psychological assault, the Alliance leadership huddled together like survivors of a disaster they didn't understand. Commander Rex paced the small room, his carapace plates shifting with agitation. Through the thick walls, they could still hear the distant screaming, muffled but persistent. Several Alliance members sat in chairs with their heads in their hands, overwhelmed by memories the plant had forced them to relive. 6 hours, Rex said, checking his chronometer. 6 hours since that thing revealed its true nature, and we're no closer to stopping it. Dr. Sarah looked up from her medical scanner, her face pale. It's not just the central chamber anymore. The root system has spread through 60% of the station's infrastructure. Life support, power grid, communication arrays, it's all connected now. The door hissed open, and Admiral James Wright entered. The senior human representative looked calm despite the crisis, his military bearing unchanged by the chaos surrounding them. Behind him walked 2 other humans, specialists in fields that the Alliance was only beginning to understand. You came back, Counselor Grace said, ice crystals forming in her breath as she spoke. We didn't think any humans would return to this station. James nodded grimly. We had to. This situation requires explanation, and you deserve to understand what we've done to you. What you've done to us. Rex's mandibles clicked with barely controlled rage. You sent us a weapon disguised as a gift. You turned our own memories against us. Members of my crew are curled up in their quarters, reliving every traumatic moment of their lives. Yes, James said simply. That's exactly what we did. The admission hung in the air like a physical presence. Captain Jack, his cybernetic system still sparking from the plant's psychic interference, leaned forward. Why? James activated a holographic display, showing images from Earth's history. Battlefields stretching to the horizon. Cities reduced to rubble. Mass graves filled with the victims of conflicts that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with ideology. Because you needed to understand what humans really are, James said. For decades, you've dismissed us as weak creatures from an easy world. You judge strength by environmental hostility, by physical adaptation to external threats. You never considered that the most dangerous environment on Earth isn't the weather or the wildlife. The display changed, showing more images. Concentration camps. Atomic explosions. Entire populations driven from their homes by their own species. It's other humans, Dr. Sarah whispered, beginning to understand. Exactly, James confirmed. Every species in the Alliance evolved on worlds that tried to kill them with radiation, acid, gravity, temperature extremes. You developed incredible physical resilience because your planets demanded it. But Earth's greatest threat was never the environment. The hologram shifted again, showing archaeological sites where the plant had been found. Ancient battlefields where the soil was still dark with old blood. Monuments to wars that had raged for generations over ideas rather than resources. Humans don't just fight for territory or food or mates, James continued. We fight over beliefs. Over concepts that exist only in our minds. We've spent thousands of years perfecting ways to destroy each other not just physically, but psychologically. Rex stopped pacing. The plant. Mimosa psychica, James said. That's its real name. It only grows in soil that's been saturated with human suffering. Battlefields, execution grounds, sites of genocide and mass trauma. It evolved to feed on psychic pain, to absorb and store the emotional resonance of death and anguish. One of the human specialists, a woman with the bearing of a military scientist, stepped forward. We've been studying specimens for 30 years. The plant doesn't just collect trauma, it processes it, amplifies it, and broadcasts it to any sentient mind within range. What you're experiencing now is thousands of years of human psychological warfare, refined into its purest form. Captain Jack's artificial eye flickered as he processed this information. You turned suffering into a weapon. We survived suffering and learned to weaponize it, James corrected. Every human alive today is descended from people who endured centuries of war, oppression, genocide, and psychological torture inflicted by their own species. We developed mental defenses that your people never needed. The screaming from the central hub seemed to grow louder, and through the station's communication system, they could hear Alliance members throughout the facility crying out in their native languages as suppressed traumas surfaced. The plant has learned from all of you now, the specialist continued. Every Alliance member who passed near it contributed their own survival experiences, their own psychological scars. It's creating a feedback loop of trauma that encompasses every species in your coalition. Counselor Rachel, her sensitive hearing protected by emergency dampeners, spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. How do we make it stop? James's expression was unreadable. You don't. That's the point. The plant will continue to grow, continue to feed on the psychic emanations of everyone on this station. It's turning your own survival instincts against you, forcing you to experience not just your own trauma, but the collective anguish of every sentient being it encounters. The lights flickered as root systems drew power from the station's grid. This is humanity's true strength, James said quietly. We don't just survive hostile environments, we internalize hostility and transform it into purpose. We turn pain into power, trauma into tools of war. The plant is proof that Earth's greatest export isn't technology or medicine or art. He paused, letting his words sink in. It's psychological warfare, refined through millennia of human conflict into something so pure that it makes your physical deathworlds look like gentle gardens. Rex sat down heavily, his proud bearing finally broken by the weight of this revelation. And if we acknowledge your demonstration? James smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then maybe we can discuss containment strategies. After all, we've been living with our demons for thousands of years. We've learned how to coexist with trauma, how to channel it into something productive rather than destructive. The screaming continued, echoing through the station's corridors, carrying with it the voices of every being who had ever suffered, ever lost, ever survived when others didn't. Welcome to the human experience, James said. Now you understand why we're the way we are. 2 weeks had passed since the plant's awakening, and the Nexus station had become something unprecedented in Alliance history. The corridors that once echoed with the confident footsteps of the galaxy's most hardened survivors now carried a different sound, the careful, measured movements of beings who had learned a new kind of caution. Captain Robert Stone walked through the main corridor beside Commander Rex, noting how the Alliance leader's posture had changed. The proud, aggressive stance that had once marked Rex as a survivor of the acid worlds was now tempered with something that looked almost like humility. The integration phase is nearly complete, Robert explained, his voice echoing softly in the wide passageway. He was the human psychological warfare specialist who had replaced Tom Harris, sent specifically to help the Alliance understand what was happening to them. The plant has finished cataloging your collective trauma. What comes next will be different. Rex's compound eyes focused on the human with an attention that would have been dismissive just weeks ago. Now there was genuine respect in his gaze, earned through shared suffering. Different how? They paused at an observation window that looked into the central hub. The plant dominated the space now, its massive form pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to follow the rhythms of nearby thoughts. Its root system had grown throughout the station's infrastructure, creating a network of organic connections that the engineers had stopped trying to remove. The screaming has changed, Rex observed. It was true, the horrible cacophony that had driven Alliance members to their knees 2 weeks ago had evolved into something else. Still present, still powerful, but no longer purely destructive. Listen carefully, Robert suggested. What do you hear now? Rex tilted his head, his species-enhanced auditory organs analyzing the complex soundscape that flowed through the station's air. The screaming was still there, but underneath it was something new, harmonies, rhythms, patterns that seemed almost musical. It's processing, Rex said slowly. The trauma, the memories. It's not just broadcasting them anymore. Exactly, Robert confirmed. This is what the plant does in its natural state on Earth. After it collects and stores psychological pain, it begins to break it down, to recontextualize traumatic experiences as survival wisdom rather than sources of ongoing anguish. Dr. Sarah joined them at the observation window, her medical scanner in hand. She had been monitoring the plant's effects on the crew since the beginning, and her readings showed remarkable changes. The stress hormones in Alliance personnel are dropping, she reported. Heart rates are normalizing. Brain chemistry is stabilizing. Through the transparent wall, they could see Alliance members moving through the central hub without the panic that had marked their behavior in the early days. Some even stopped to observe the plant, no longer fleeing from its presence. It's helping us, Sarah continued, wonder in her voice. The trauma it forced us to confront, we're processing it now instead of just burying it. My people from the ice worlds, we were taught that emotional pain was weakness. But this thing is teaching us that acknowledging pain can make us stronger. The sound of approaching footsteps made them turn. Admiral James Wright entered the corridor, and the Alliance representative straightened, not from fear or obligation, but from genuine respect. The plant had forced them to understand something fundamental about humanity's place in the galaxy. The Federation Council has reached a decision, James announced. The Alliance's petition for humanity's full membership has been approved. Equal voting rights, equal resource allocation, equal representation in all diplomatic matters. The silence that followed was profound. This was what the Alliance had debated for decades, whether to accept humanity as equals despite their apparently soft origins. The plant had settled that debate in the most brutal way possible. Councillor Grace stepped forward, ice crystals forming in her breath. "We understand now," she said quietly. "What we mistook for weakness was actually a different kind of strength. Physical adaptation to hostile environments is one challenge. But learning to survive the psychological warfare that your own species can inflict, that requires something we never developed." Captain Jack approached from another corridor, his cybernetic systems now functioning normally after weeks of interference. "Your gift taught us about ourselves too," he admitted. "We thought we knew what it meant to be survivors because we could endure radiation storms and acid rain. But we never learned to defend against attacks on our own minds." Robert nodded. "The plant will remain here, if you'll accept it. It's bonded with the station now, integrated with your life support systems and infrastructure. It's become something new, not just a repository of human trauma, but Alliance trauma as well." Through the walls, they could hear the plant's latest emanations. The screaming had evolved into something that sounded almost like singing, still carrying the weight of remembered pain, but transformed into something that resembled peace. "A weapon that becomes a healer," Rex mused. "Very human." "Not just human anymore," James corrected. "The plant has learned from all of you. Your experiences, your survival strategies, your ways of coping with loss. It's becoming a synthesis of human psychological resilience and Alliance physical toughness." The formal ceremonies that followed would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. Alliance members who had once viewed humans as inhabitants of an easy world now recognized them as perhaps the most formidable survivors in the galaxy, not despite their psychological scars, but because of how they had learned to transform those scars into strength. As the meetings concluded and normal station operations resumed, the plant's influence continued to spread through the facility. Those who worked near it reported strange dreams, not nightmares, but visions of their own traumatic memories being rewoven into narratives of triumph rather than loss. The gift had been accepted in the most complete way possible. The Alliance had gained not just new members, but a new understanding of survival itself. Physical toughness was important, but psychological resilience, the ability to transform suffering into wisdom, was perhaps even more valuable. In the depths of space, the station continued its orbit, carrying within it a living testament to an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the most dangerous predators in the universe were the ones who learned to weaponize their own pain, and then taught others how to heal from it. The screaming had stopped. In its place was something that sounded suspiciously like hope.